The first adoption that we experienced was very meaningful, will always be very meaningful to us because it was the first adoption, but also because of the story of this young woman who was a rape victim, who found herself pregnant, who didn't think that she could become pregnant because she was on Depo-Provera. And because of that, when she went to the hospital after the rape, they didn't give her any sort of morning after treatment. She found herself pregnant. She called Planned Parenthood. She said, "I've been raped. I'm pregnant. Please help me." They told her to come in, and she did. And she sat there, she says, in her own words, for what seemed like hours. And eventually she looked up and thought to herself, this baby hasn't done anything wrong. And she decided at that moment that somebody would love this baby and raise this baby. And she placed that baby into our hands, and we got to pray with her, for her, over her, as this young woman courageously, after being a victim of rape, decided not only to give birth, but also to make an adoption plan for this child. And so when people talk about, being pro-life, except in the case of rape and incest, and one of our children was the product of incest, it says that all of our children should have been allowed to live, except those two. I'm not willing to accept that. I was born to a single teenage mother. I was one of those children that people talk about when they talk about abortion. They talk about growing up without a father. They talk about growing up poor. They talk about the difficulties that children will have if they are brought into this world. And all of that is true, but all of that is also my life. And so when people talk that way, what they say is a life that was spent like mine was early on is somehow not worthy of even existing. And I find that personally insulting, but also very sad, because there are a lot of people whom God has used and called and forged in the crucible of difficulty early on in their life. So for me, this is a very personal issue. It was difficult for my mother. It was difficult for her to raise me alone. She worked hard. She worked often. She often had more than one job. My mother was a brilliant student. She graduated from college when she was 49 years old. And the reason she graduated from college at 49 is because she had a child. She got pregnant when she was 17. And that ended that part of her journey. And I remember going to my mother's graduation from college and sitting there and sobbing as she walked across the stage at almost 50 years old, recognizing that that was happening at that moment because of sacrifices that she had to make to raise me. I see women like my mom all the time. More than that, I see people who were raised by women like my mom all the time. It's not the most common story, but it is a common story. And again, it's one that, according to abortion advocates, is not worth telling or being told. Before this man became our president, four times, he voted not to protect the lives even of children who were alive after a failed abortion. That's unspeakable. It's hard for me to find words for how gruesome that is, to say that if an abortion is unsuccessful and a child survives, that child should not have legal protection and should be killed anyway. He's the most radically pro-abortion president that we've ever had, the most radically pro-abortion man who's ever run for the office. And I cannot comprehend what that will mean over the course of history and how we will be viewed for having elected such a man. it's beyond acceptable in our culture. It's normalized, almost even celebrated. So that is a big difference between my life and a lot of lives that don't get to even begin today. I couldn't watch the Democratic National Convention. I'm so grieved by their celebration of abortion, and abortion is such a kind word. It's the annihilation of human life. I'm grieved by that. I'm also grieved by the absolute ignorance of many people who are targeted by abortionists. Black women make up around 11% of the population, but a third or more of the abortions. Black and Hispanic women combined, around a quarter of the population, more than half of the abortions. In major cities in the U.S., more than half of all pregnancies of black women end in abortion. We've been targeted since the onset, but it was before Planned Parenthood and Margaret Sanger's Negro Project. We've been targeted by abortionists. And now to see black people flock to a party whose platform and history has been dead set on their annihilation boggles my mind. I want to invite you personally to the celebration of life. I've had the privilege of participating in the event, and I cannot tell you how powerful it is to be in an environment where there are that many people who are on the same page. It gives you hope. It gives you courage to continue. And it also gives you a sense of urgency. We're not alone. There are thousands of prophets who haven't bowed the knee to Baal. And being at the celebration of life reminds you of that, and reminds you that God is still on his throne and that this thing's not over yet.
Happen to watch any of the
Asher.
out to people who are not in the church?
Asher. Shh. That's making a lot of noise, buddy. Don't open that. Okay?
What specifically about your